Matthew Olzmann is the author of two collections of poems. It's actually three now. You have one coming out.
Next January,
Yeah, what is the title of that one?
Constellation Route.
Oh, nice. And the two previous poems, Mezzanines, which was selected by the Kundiman Prize, and Contradictions in the Design, both from Alice James books, and wonderful collections of poetry that you should check out. I'll be putting those titles in the chat. He's received fellowships from the Kundiman, the Kresge Arts Foundation, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and his poems, stories, and essays have appeared in Best American Poetry, Kenyon Review, New England Review, Necessary Fiction, Brevity, Southern Review, and elsewhere. He teaches at Dartmouth College with his wife, Ivy Francis, and in the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. Yeah, so Matthew, thank you so much for being with us, and I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I'll spotlight your video, and I'm also going to make you a co-host so that you, if you want to do a screen sharing or anything like that, you can.
All right, everyone. So I'll read some poems, and then we'll talk about the writing of poems. This first poem is called "Letter Written While Standing in Line at Comic-Con." Klingon, Parseltongue, Navi. People invent imaginary languages so imaginary citizens of imaginary worlds can speak to one another. Elvish, Ewokese, Dothraki. You can learn these languages, come to a convention with your face painted blue or a leather scabbard bolted to your back, and talk to people who will understand you. I understand what language feels like when you're not understood. More than once, I thought some other planet might be my home. Last week, in an alley, I saw a man punch another man until neither really looked like a person. There are hundreds of reasons like this to long to be from some other galaxy, century, or dimension. Reasons to put on a spacesuit or a wizard's cloak and hope no one will recognize you. But it's not these costumes that amaze me. It's always been the languages, the way they reach for something that can't be said in our tongue. In the only language I know, there are not enough words for parabola or isotope, too few phrases to say, I'm sorry, or I'm glad that I found you. Though we've been married for years, I wish we met when we were children. If we had known each other in the year you spent alone on Earth without one friend, we could have been aliens together. I'd have those green four-fingered hands, you with your glow-in-the-dark antennae, words in the form of strange whirling noises, low chirping machine music, wisps of static, lamentations of rain. Only you and I would know what these sounds meant. I like to kill all the baby snakes is the third thing my niece, age 4, says she loves about where she's from. She ranks this lower than cartoons or toys, but higher than reading or her brothers. It's how I know she's from Texas, where they set traps in the crawl spaces and keep the lawn cut real low. It's also how I know I'm not from Texas. I was talking to my wife about one's sense of place, how to be from a place, how a place defines you. She has a turbulent relationship with nature, not because it's not beautiful, filled with enchantments, a sorceress with a gift for music, but because it can't be reasoned with. She tells me, with people, you might charm your way out of a traffic ticket or a fist fight, and it's true. All kinds of wars have been avoided by people sitting at the table to talk. Nature is indifferent to these negotiations. Look around and you can see how the floodplain reclaims a few more houses each year, elm trees wrestling up through the wrecked floors of discarded Chevys, and there are cracks in every highway. Earth is older than you, and it takes back everything that belongs to it, which is to say it takes back everything. Where I live now in New Hampshire, a wild cat ripped a deer apart next door last week. The rational mind, Aristotle says, separates us from the wild. When I lived down south, my friends told me that bears wouldn't harm you unless you got between a mother and her cubs. This is a thing a rational mind would believe, but run into some bears out in the woods and you can't exactly say, I'm not trying to bother you, let me go in peace. Nothing was put here to listen to you. not the bear, not the wolf, the earthquake, or the fire, not the serpent or the spirit who sent it, not the honeybee or the blossom they set on your headstone, not the mountain lion displaced from the mountain, not the mountain itself. I thought about that one, Nate, because Nathan, because of our conversation yesterday about the bears in Asheville. This is a commencement speech delivered before the North American Flat Earth Academy's graduating class of Free Thought Fellows. I assumed I'd be given this speech in an auditorium, but this spot outside of an Arby's restroom in Denton, Texas will have to do. Admittedly, I was skeptical, but Soren Kierkegaard once said, personality is only ripe when a man has made the truth his own. The 6 of you men have made the truth your own, and your personality is definitely ripe. Granted, a personality few would love, but what is love when one has the truth? I have another question. Are we actually allowed to be here right now? The people behind the counter keep giving me weird looks. One of us should probably go buy something. Thanks. What were we talking about again? That's right, Kierkegaard. He also said, what is truth but to live for an idea? Certainly you are living for an idea that might be wrong, an idea driving drunk on the highway of its own delusions, waving a metal rod in the lightning storm of human arrogance. But one of history's great thinkers says that living for an idea is truth. Therefore, even the worst of our ideas are true if we live for them. Live your truth. People around the globe will take notice. Sorry, I didn't mean the part about around the globe. That's a figure of speech. Never mind. Kierkegaard also said the crucial thing is to find a truth which is true for me. You have found a truth which is true for you. And though it's not true for anyone else, it's your truth, a potent truth, one that glowers at the evidence stacked before it like Bigfoot or some other sprawling conspiracy. Even if it's fraudulent, let no one say your truth is not powerful. Your truth is the kind that rewrites history books, the kind that says the moon landing was fake, that claims windmills cause cancer and invades its neighbor when it gets bored. People might die because of it, but it's a truth that will believe what it wants to believe because it wants to believe, or because not believing would mean having to believe something else, something less certain. Like that summer when I set my life on fire, then stalked through my house looking for someone to accuse or someone to absolve me of blame, but there was no one left but me. I was alone with my truth and felt very small. In that moment, the world was enormous, too vast and strange for me to continue living inside it. So I stepped precisely out of it. And from that bright distance, I could see everything spinning in a circle away. All right, I'm going to screen share just to give some context for this next poem. All right, what you guys are about to watch is from, I think, the 2011 NBA Slam Dunk competition.
Can he do it? If I can see it. Did not
All right, I wanted to show that the video of Blake Griffin dunking over the car, because that dunk was what inspired this sort of inspired this poem. And Blake Griffin dunks over a car with a full gospel choir crooning behind him, with 20,000 spectators surging to their feet, and with an arena of flashbulbs flashing its approval. And I'm spellbound, thinking it's all so spectacular, until the broadcast team weighs in, and Charles Barkley says, "That wasn't the greatest dunk." And Marv Albert says, "But the presentation was pretty fun." And I'm made to revisit what I thought I saw as one question replaces all other questions. Was it truly extraordinary, or by the paragon of unimpeachable aesthetic standards by which the annual NBA slam dunk competition is adjudicated, was it actually pedestrian, mortal, a somewhat meh occurrence made mythic only through gimmicks and frills? Like those little fish that eat bits of plastic in the Pacific because they believe bits of plastic look like microscopic food particles, I too can be charmed by any well-crafted illusion. Copperfield makes the Statue of Liberty disappear. Penn and Teller catch bullets between their knowing teeth. Smelling like a new vacuum cleaner, the con man in my heart successfully hawks all his useless trinkets to the hopeful stooge who stumbles through my brain. Snake oil and radium ore, the furcula of a partridge, the foot of a rabbit. I want to believe in the marvelous, not because it feels authentic, but because the alternative is a world where no one dons a cape to leap over buildings, no one turns lead into kindness, no one sings the kraken to sleep. In a kingdom that insists on repudiating all enchantments, I feel catastrophic and alone. I watch the trees get older. I watch ice form on their branches. Last winter, I sat in an emergency room after my wife collapsed at work. Her doctors asked questions, but gave no explanations. They sent us home not knowing why or what or if it would happen again. You can look for answers, but sometimes there's no wand to wave, no sorcery to make anything okay. There's just doubt, and it rocks you toward whatever trick of light you'll cling to next. I will reach for any rationale offered. I might pray or go to church where a priest tells a story about transubstantiation, hands me a chalice filled with possibility, and I know there's no blood there. I know the wine will taste like wine. Still, I lift the cup. I'll read one more, and then we'll move on with our lives. This poem is called Letter to the Person Who during the Q&A session after the reading asked for career advice. The confusion you feel is not your fault. When we were younger, guidance counselors steered us toward respectable occupations: doctor, lawyer, pharmacist, dentist. Not once did they say exorcist, snake milker, or race car helmet tester. Always investment banker, IT specialist, marketing associate, never rodeo clown, never air guitar soloist, chainsaw juggler, or miniature golf windmill maker. In this country, in the year I was born, some 3.1 million other people were also born, each with their own destiny, the lines of their palms predicting an incandescent future. Were all of them supposed to be strategy consultants and commodity analysts? Water slide companies pay people to slide down water slides to evaluate their products. Somehow, that's an actual legitimate job. So is the naming of nail polish colors. Were any of these presented as options? You need to follow your passion as long as your passion is not a sestina and is definitely a hedge fund. If I could do it over, I'd suggest an entry-level position standing by a riverbank or a middle management opportunity winding like fog through the sugar maples of New England. There's a catastrophic shortage today of bagpipe cleaners, tombstone sculptors, and tightrope walkers. When they tell you about the road ahead, they forget the quadrillion other roads. You'll know which one is yours because it fills you with astonishment or ends with you being reborn as an alpine ibex, a gravity-defying goat, able to leap 7 feet in the air, find footholds where none exist, and without ever imagining it could be anything else, scale a vertical sheet of solid rock to find some branches, twigs, or wild berries to devour. Thanks for listening to those guys. So I thought something we'd talk about today was the idea in poetry of using the direct address, which can be used in not just poetry, of course, but also in essays or in fiction. I'm sort of interested in epistolary poems that sort of mimic the shape of a letter, where you have like one person speaking very specifically to one other person. And if you'll excuse me for a moment, I'm gonna plug my computer charger in. But that's kind of how I started writing poems, was through something that resembled, something that was kind of closer to an unmailed letter than a poem. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, where someone makes a joke at your expense or someone disses you and you come up with like the best response, but 20 minutes later. So that's a sort of feeling that I have a lot, not just because someone tells a joke at my expense, but I'm always sort of thinking, oh, I could have said this better. I could have said this differently. Or maybe I didn't say anything at all. Like maybe I wasn't sure what to say in the moment. And so I just didn't say anything. And then later I think of the like things that I obviously could have said. Like I'm sure after this class is over, I'll think of like 25 things I could have said differently, and I'll say, oh, I could have said this, I could have explained this differently, that was probably unclear. But that's really sort of how I started creative writing. I wasn't necessarily setting out to be a poet at the time. Like I was just at that time starting to become interested in reading poems. I'd always liked stories and novels, but poems are kind of new to me. So when I started writing, it wasn't necessarily me thinking, oh, I'm gonna be a poet. But I started writing things down, and they were often things that I wish I said, or I wish I could say. And so a lot of times I was speaking to like a specific person. And the poems kind of resembled like unmailed letters. So they could be, it could be to a friend, it could be to a parent, it could be to God, or to anyone that I had something to say to that I couldn't say in the moment, or I felt like I couldn't. And that sort of impulse has kind of remained with me through in a lot of the poems that I've written over the years. And for the next book I have coming out, it's a lot of poems kind of in that mode, poems that are sort of like these letters or apostrophes to a very specific audience. But I've noticed that as a poet in the world now, I've noticed that I'm not really alone in that. Like a lot of poems are kind of speaking to one specific person. Like almost every love poem is using the direct address, talking to, like there's a you, like there's a speaker talking to you over there. This is how I feel. And it's sort of it's sort of a unique poem, type of mode of delivery. It's a little bit different from other types of writing, because one of the things that sort of fascinated me is whenever I hear people talk about these types of poems, we talk about the content, we talk about the form, we talk about the speaker. But one of the things that's really fascinating to me is that our understanding of who is being addressed shapes how we experience the poem. And that's kind of like a unique feature. Like this person who's not really even present in the poem, sometimes our understanding of that person kind of steers how we engage with the work. So what I mean is I sent some poems to you guys. So the first poem in there is called Mermaid Song. It's by Kim Adenichio, and it goes like this. Mermaid Song for Aya at 15. Damp-haired from the bath, you drape yourself upside down across the sofa, reading, one hand idly sunk into a bowl of crackers, goldfish with smiles stamped on. I think they are growing gills, swimming up the sweet air to reach you. Small girl, my slim miracle, they multiply. In the black hours when I lie sleepless, near drowning, dread heavy, your face is the bright lure I look for, love's hook piercing me, hauling me cleanly up. So this poem is a poem where you have a speaker speaking to someone. Like when you get to damp-haired from the bath, you drape yourself. The second we hit like the word you in a poem, the reader is going to wonder, who's that? Are they speaking to me? Are they speaking to someone else? And from the specificity of details, we get that they're not speaking to us. So then we start wondering, okay, who is this? And then we see the dedication for Aya at 15. Okay, so we know who's being spoken to. And then the next question though is, who's Aya? And this kind of poem is sort of driven partially by what's being said, but partially by our desire to sort of figure that out. Is Aya are these two childhood friends speaking to each other at 15? Is Aya a student in a classroom? Is Aya do any of you guys have an opinion on who Aya is?
A mermaid.
A mermaid. Okay, because of the title, Mermaid Song.
Sorry, my imagination is not good.
No, I can see
Yeah.
no, that brings up like a sort of important consideration, how the title sort of shapes our expectations. So a mermaid. Anyone else?
Or possibly a child, like a young child.
A child like her daughter or something?
Yeah.
Like that? Yeah. Could be. Yeah, her daughter. Anyone else? You know, I had this I once was teaching a class, and someone said her daughter, and like 8 other people said, yeah, it's probably her daughter. And one person said, I think it's like addressing like a lover, or like a lover like when they were younger or something. And those are 2 very different poems. I would assume, you know, I think if you're, you know, if we but also like a mermaid would be a very different poem. If it, so it could be a daughter, a partner, or a mermaid, and any of those would cause this poem to be read in kind of radically different ways, I think. And and so I kind of know that Aya is the poet's daughter, like the poet literally has a daughter named Aya, but I know that just from knowing a bit about the poet, and from this poem. It appears in a book called Tell Me. It's in the 3rd section of this book, and that section has like 4 poems that are about this daughter named Aya, or about the speaker's relationship with her daughter. So it could be possible that I'm prepared to read this as a poem about her daughter because of like other surrounding context, but the poem itself, it depends only on like what's there to kind of instruct us. And that creates all kinds of challenges for the poet, because you don't if you're talking to your daughter, you don't necessarily come out and say, for Aya, who is my daughter, because Aya knows that, you know, she's the speaker's daughter. Like if I send a text message to my mom, I don't have to say, I just say, hey, can you remind James to call me back? Or can you, hey, like sometimes I don't even say mom, like I might just say like, hey, I'll be back on the 15th of January, or something, like, or we're just corresponding and we have like this whole history, and like we don't have to just jump in and explain everything from the start. Like I don't have to start a text message by saying, dear mom, you gave birth to me over 40 years ago, and now we live in different states. I mean, she knows all that. So like one of the things that's a challenge is if you're speaking to someone, you have to speak to them in a way that feels natural. But for the reader has no idea like who Aya is, who the speaker is, what the relationship between them is, and that's something they start reaching for. And so in this type of poem, you have to like use different types of clues to kind of steer the reader towards helping them figure that out. Like we see it's like we know that I is 15, it's a domestic setting, like it feels like it's in the evening, so we kind of guess like who might be present in this situation, and then we kind of are guessing from like what we see of Aya, who's uncreeped out by the speaker's presence there. And so you kind of take what you know of what the given material, and then what seems appropriate and what seems possible, and you try to piece together like a little narrative. But that becomes one of the driving factors in this type of poem, like who is Aya? I want to look at another poem that's addressed to someone very specific. It's by Pat Rizal. It's called Guitar. Guitar for Sheila, who wants to learn to play. The bottom end's a little shallow, and you might need to shim the bridge to hush the 5th fret buzz. The action's low and the neck a tad warped, but I swear this thing sings. For 10 years, I've accompanied lovers, convicts, and children with this guitar. Bought it with my last $100. 50 more perhaps than it was worth that day. I just wanted to touch nylon again, to play the way my Uncle Eli used to, till cancer mugged him for his lungs. He sang, Sheila, and the guitar did too. And that kind of singing was like 11 acres of sky to a 9-year-old kid, terrified of a 50-mile-per-hour fast of a 50-mile-per-hour hardball. The summer my father came back from burying his mother in the Philippines, he told my brother and me the 2 oblong boxes he pulled off the luggage conveyor were ours. Once home, we pried the cardboard apart, tearing the packing tape and snapping the industrial staples loose with our bare hands. I ran my fingers slow around the slick sound hole edge. I stuck my nose into the strings to smell the jackwood fruit. The jackfruit wood stewing inside, and when I pulled my face away, the instrument made its first silken hum. I don't know if you believe in time the way I do, but when history touches us, it's like hearing a skinny uncle learn to sing with a cigarette dangling from his lips, without one note of misery in his dying, and the guitar he's holding is yours. You might not understand the words sailing past you, but one day, years later, on a drive back to Rockland, maybe, where an old woman scolded you as a child or kissed the small bones of your shoulders, you may find yourself singing out of nowhere that tune. I mean to say, I never thanked my father for that first guitar. I smashed it in a tantrum against my heel, and I didn't own another until this one. I should warn you, every guitar has its ghosts, and they'll ask you whom you love and how much. As for learning, your hands are going to ache a little while, but one day when the chords come easy, the guitar will whisper to you some old secret. Whisper back. The most beautiful intervals are ancient and imperfect. They'll teach you to love something so deep, you'll want nothing better than to give it all away. So this poem's kind of similar to the other one. You know, you have like this direct address where the poet's speaking directly to someone. They're speaking to Sheila, and then we might wonder who Sheila is. And this one, the effect though is a little bit different because, and I'm not trying to say one approach is better than the other. I love both of these poems a lot. Like I think both of these poems are really fascinating poems. But they work a little bit differently because here I actually spend less. It's a longer poem, and I get actually less information about Sheila. Like you don't really learn anything about Sheila in this other than she wants to learn how to play guitar. But there's like, unlike the shorter Kim Adonicio poem, there's not really any description of this person or anything about how the speaker feels toward this person. The whole thing's talking about a guitar. And so the effect here is a little bit different because in the Adonicio poem, we sense like the relationship is very important to understanding this poem. And so we're trying to figure out, like, we spend a little bit of time trying to figure out what's the relationship between these two parties. Here, we might do that, but one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is that I guess I would say every poem kind of has a way of teaching you what's most important. In this poem, the title is Guitar. Then the dedication says for Sheila who wants to learn to play, which references the guitar. And then the first line is immediately talking about the guitar. So what it does is it sort of directs our attention to this thing outside of the relationship. And that's a way to kind of align the reader and the addressee. Like in a poem where there's the direct address, where you're speaking directly to someone you know, the reader might have this feeling like, oh, there's a context I have to figure out. Like there's something I don't know. But in this poem here, he sort of positioned the reader and the addressee in the exact same position. Because like we're not really talking about Sheila anymore. We're talking about this guitar over here. And both, you know, me as the reader and Sheila, we don't know any of this stuff about the guitar. So he sort of aligned us. So we're kind of wondering the same thing as the addressee. That's one of the things that's kind of weird about these types of poems is every poem sort of most poems have a really clear line of communication. It goes like poet to the reader, and that's like kind of the line of communication, or speaker to the reader, and that's how the line of communication goes. In poems with using the direct address, there's a third party involved. It's still, the line of communication is still poet over here, reader over there, but we're just pretending that that's not the line of communication. We're pretending we're talking to a third party who's not actually present. So it's like you and your imaginary friend just hanging out, having a conversation, and the reader's position is a sort of eavesdropper on that conversation, trying to figure out what the context is. So that's what happens when you have like when you're speaking to someone who the speaker clearly knows on a personal basis. But not all poems using the direct address do that. There's all kinds of different types of addressees. Like there's a poem in your packet called Ode to the Maggot by Yusef Kumanyaka. Brother of the blowfly and Godhead, you work magic over battlefields and slabs of bad pork and flop houses. Yes, you go to the root of all things. You are sound and mathematical. Jesus Christ, you're merciless with the truth, ontological and lustrous. You cast spells on beggars and kings behind the stone door of Caesar's tomb, or split trench in a field of ragweed. No decree or creed can outlaw you as you take every living thing apart. Little master of earth, no one gets to heaven without going through you first. So this poem like also has a direct address where it's speaking to like a very specific party, but like it's you have this guy and he's talking to a maggot. But this poem's very different from the poems we just looked at, because we don't wonder like, oh my gosh, I wonder what his relationship to this maggot is. I wonder how they know each other. I wonder like about their personal history. We like this type of speech falls under the category of apostrophe, where you're talking to someone or something that can't speak back to you necessarily. And generally we see this as this type of speech as non-literal. So like we don't necessarily I don't think I read this poem and picture Yusef Kumanyaka like kneeling in the dirt speaking to a maggot. Instead, we sort of sense that there's like something really figurative happening here. Like the poem is a kind of becoming a kind of metaphor. And that, for me, that's what ends up driving this type of poem. I start becoming curious, okay, how is this going to work out? Like, why is he talking to a maggot? What's the sort of symbolic meaning behind that? And so here, instead of searching for a context in the relationship, I'm kind of propelled forward to understand like the sort of figurative dimensions of the poem, which really only become clear in those last lines when it's saying to the maggot, little master of earth, no one gets to heaven without going through you first. We start to see the poem as a type of meditation on like the nature of mortality and the inevitability of eventually dying. So that's one thing that I find kind of, hold on, I'm trying to close something. All right. That's one thing I'm kind of drawn to in this poem, because I'm very much drawn to the idea that poems can just sort of function as a type of metaphor. That doesn't automatically happen when you're using a direct address, like speaking to an inanimate object or an animal. I'm going to show you another video in a second. All right, we're going to watch a clip from Saturday Night Live, which is also a person talking to this Ode to a Maggot. It's also got a guy talking to an animal. All right, I wanted to show that just because I didn't want to give the impression that like anytime you have like a type of apostrophe, it becomes like the sort of lofty extended metaphor. It can be, and it has the potential to do that. I think that one of the differences here is like both of these have a person talking to animals, but the one with Andy Samberg, being Mark Wahlberg talks to animals, is sort of absurd, where the other one is sort of like feels kind of lofty and eloquent and lyrical and very kind of serious. It has a very sort of weighty tone to it. I think the obvious differences might be tone, but also the Saturday Night Live sketch takes something which is originally a theater convention, the idea of apostrophe, and something that we're supposed to see as figurative, and makes it literal. It makes it, we literally see him talking to the donkey, but also he's talking to the donkey about very mundane things. Like unlike the Ode to the Maggot, which seems to then become like this meditation on death, there's also not like an analog that we can directly connect to any of these sort of speeches to turn it into sort of a metaphor. So it becomes kind of absurd. And I don't know if there are any aspiring absurdists in this classroom, but if there are, one note to take with you is that any metaphor, when made literal, always has the potential to be completely ridiculous and strange and weird. So these are kind of two different modes that use the direct address. One that's sort of the epistolary mode and it's talking to a specific person. One's the type of apostrophe where you might not be talking to a person, you're speaking to a specific thing. It could be a person who's not present, but it could also be to the stars or to a maggot or to the moon. And there's a number of other ways which this can happen, but both of these, how we understand the identity of the person or thing being spoken to shapes our experience of what's actually being said to that person. And a couple things you might take with you if you find yourself getting stuck writing. One of the things I've done is I just start by writing a letter to someone. If I'm writing to a person, I think it's good to remember that the person who reads this poem will almost never be the person you're writing to, and so you have to keep that reader in mind at all times. Like if you're writing a letter to a partner or a friend, most likely if you send this poem off to a magazine somewhere, it's going the people who read it are not going to be that person. So we have to kind of keep aware that there's going to be information they might need, but you can write to I found that I can write to a person, and then that poem can then become about anything. Like if I'm writing to my father, usually mostly when I speak to my dad, I'm not talking to my dad about our relationship. I'm talking to my dad about sports or politics, unfortunately, or what's going on in Vermont since he lives in Michigan. I can be saying this is what's going on over here, but you could talk to it becomes a way to frame different types of poems in a different way for me. My other suggestion is if you feel like you're ever stuck writing, write a letter to a thing. Just look around your room and pick an object and say something to it and see. And one of my teachers, Stephen Dobbins, used to say subject as pretext, and this is what he meant is you start writing about one subject, and then it becomes apparent that you're writing about some larger element later through that subject. So if you're writing a letter to a cell phone or to a glass of water, it could end up becoming a poem literally about anything else as well. And for me, that's a way that's helped me get a lot of poems generated or at least started. So
Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to have you in person sometime when this is all over.
That.
Yeah.
I love